Back when I was in my mid-20s, I lived with a roommate in Boston that I had participated in an international exchange program with a couple of years before. Over the course of the years before I was a priest, I lived in a lot of apartments and I had a lot of roommates. But this one was kind of special because we were just out of this exchange program. We were young, everybody was just starting off in life. And when I found out he was moving to Boston around the same time I was, that was cool enough. But then when we found out that our exchange program was having a reunion in Boston the summer after we got there, we just couldn't believe it. It meant that friends from all over the world were going to be coming to our city for this reunion, and we were going to get to host them. We had a very cool apartment at that time. We had great landlords, Anna and Arthur, and we were right on, if you know Boston, you'll know this area, right on Revere Beach. I kind of couldn't believe that I was right on the ocean, but if you've been to Revere, you know how that is. And so we were so excited. I said to Anna and Arthur one day, who were very, very loving to us, people who, whenever they would go to the bakery, they'd always have a couple of donuts in a brown paper bag on our stoop after they got back. I said, Anna, I've got great news. A lot of our friends are going to be coming to Boston for this reunion, so we're going to host them at our place. And she said, how many people are coming? And I said, well, I don't know, but I think we'll probably just crash with like 8 or 10 people just for 2 nights. And she said, nope, you can't do that. But it was kind of awkward because I wasn't asking, I was telling her like a neighbor, So I kind of moved on, and then a week later, all these people came to Boston, and we hosted about 10 of them. Sleeping bags all over the floor, had such a good time, it was great. And then they went home, and we got evicted. We got evicted. We had a letter on the door telling us that we had 30 days to leave. And it was a shock. But maybe it shouldn't have been. Because after all, no matter how nice Anna and Arthur were to us, they were the owners and we were the tenants. That relationship is one of those classic relationships in life, the owners and the tenants. And we're hearing about it in the gospel. The tenant farmers walked onto that farm or onto that vineyard like they owned the place. But the lesson of this parable is, just because we're on the farm doesn't mean we own the place. And it's very clear from the beginning that Jesus is directing this story to the higher-ups, to the chief priests and the elders. So he's talking to the people with the power. And one of the things he's saying to them is, you don't own the religion. It's God's. It's as if he's saying to us today, hey, you priests, don't get confused and start thinking that you own this religion or that you own the parishes that you're serving at. This is like God's restaurant, and we're the waiters and waitresses. We're the servers. We're not the owners. And so that's true for all of us. There are sometimes in some parishes people who kind of rule the roost, and they're like, well, I'm on 5 committees and I'm in charge of this or that. And the message is, right, but you're not the owner of the parish. No one could own the church. It's always God's. And the warning is pretty clear. Don't act up, because God can get somebody else to cover your shift. We know that we didn't choose to come here. We had no control over it. And none of us has an idea at all of what day we're leaving. We're not the owners. We're the tenants. And if we're honest with ourselves, it's a really good time for this kind of tough love jolt, because we've been walking around the world like we own the place, collectively, as a people. And we're forgetting that it actually belongs to God. We're in the second section now of this book, Rediscover Jesus, reading the second group of of chapters, and one of the main messages of this, very lovingly but very firmly, is let's not get confused about who's really in charge. And we're not hearing this story because God wants to evict us. God doesn't want to evict us. It's so that we can understand that all of us have the opportunity to cooperate with God's plan and be wonderful tenants who leave this vineyard in better condition than we got it. But the reason why this gospel is so good for us right now is if we're honest, not just us, but as a human family, we are blowing it. We are really blowing it. And right now, it's just very obvious, isn't it, how much we're blowing it. You see what's going on with civility in society. We're not managing. We have to have signs at ice cream windows and in the post office that says, please don't be mean to us. Please don't use swear words in public. Why do we need those reminders? How did this happen? Look at what happens with our elected officials. They all act like, isn't this a shame? We've got to start working together. But they don't mean it. Everything they do makes it worse. They don't mean it. They're not working toward a solution. And the planet, we've just had such a hard summer all over the world because the planet is in deep trouble. The church that we're in right now, the Catholic Church, is bankrupt. And we can't really act like victims about it because it's for a very good reason. We know exactly why this happened, and it's shameful. We're blowing it. And that's why it's so important that this very challenging story presents to us an image that has within it the hope that we need. It's a farming story. And farmers will tell you, the thing you do when you need hope on your farm is remember that there's always next season coming. You can have a terrible crop one season, and that doesn't mean that the next season can't be better. I'm from Western New York, and any Buffalo Bills fan will tell you, all the hope is always in next season. Thank goodness for next season. And we've got everything we need for next season. We really do, right here and right now. The messages that we're getting in these scriptures, these are the seeds that are getting planted. And whenever what we're hearing doesn't match what's going on in the world or in our community, we know what we got to do. We've got to align it with this. This is the true north. This is the compass. So we can plant those seeds, and then immediately, every time we come, they get watered in the Eucharist. And if we keep coming, if we make this our practice and come week after week, the soil is getting tilled. And there is hope for good growth when we start putting fertilizer in the field, when we start really focusing on the next season and having a greater yield than we've yet had. One of the things that always uplifts us is when we look at who's going to be in charge next season. When you see those kids come forward for Faith Finders, do you not feel so uplifted by knowing that we're going to be in good hands? They're being formed the way that they need to be to guide us through the challenges that we're going to have. And when you go spend time with our kids at SMSA, you never leave depressed. You always leave uplifted at seeing what the next generation has to offer. So each of us is being encouraged today to ask ourselves, what is needed in my life or in my parish or in my community here in Glens Falls? What is needed so that next season can make God smile? What do I need to do to make God smile in the next season? How can I use my little plot here to get a better harvest? And then again, since we know that we're tenants, since we know that we don't own the farm, what can we do to pass on this land in better condition than we found it? How do we show gratitude for what we've been given by showing how much we want the next generation to thrive? The thing we hear about in this story is that God is not like Anna and Arthur, my landlords in Boston. There is a second chance with God, always. There's always next season. But since there's no way for us to know just how many seasons we have left, let's make this next one, count.